Have you ever wondered about the origins of the transatlantic slave trade? The roots of this deplorable period in history run deeper than you might think, beginning long before the arrival of Europeans on African soil. In Central Africa, slavery and forced labor were commonplace practices for centuries, existing well before Western contact. These practices were employed to augment the wealth of groups, just as marriage was. In pre-colonial Central African societies, various forms of slavery existed, involving war slaves, pawn slaves, slaves given in payment of fines, children born from the union between a slave and a free man, descendants of slaves, and slaves associated with ritual functions or accompanying chiefs. The focus of our study is the transatlantic slave trade in Central Africa, initiated by the Portuguese in the early 16th century. We seek to understand the trajectories taken by slave traders in Central Africa to bring their captives to the Atlantic coast en route to the American continent. Before the arrival of Europeans, Central Africa was traversed from east to west by established routes to facilitate the movement of caravans. Slave traders captured their victims during raids, then drove them across these routes, shaped by the barter practiced by Africans since ancient times. The Atlantic trade with Europeans did not create new trade routes, but rather intensified an already existing exchange system. The beginnings of the transatlantic slave trade in Central Africa can be traced back to the 15th or 16th century, spanning the entire current countries of the Central African Economic Community. This region once encompassed the kingdoms of Congo, Kakongo, Ngoyo, Loango, and many others. The onset of the slave trade in Central Africa, according to our research, dates back to the 16th century, around 1515. Europeans, such as Diego Cao, arrived in Central Africa in the 15th century, well before the discovery of America by the Portuguese Pedro Cabral in 1500. Some historians place the beginnings of the trade as early as 1491, while others, like Annie Merlet, have it starting in 1515 to meet the labor needs of the Iberian Peninsula, the Azores, Madeira, and Brazil. In summarizing the main points discussed in this video, we've touched on the pre-existing slavery practices in Central Africa, the intensification of the slave trade with the arrival of Europeans, and the routes used by slave traders to transport their captives to the Atlantic coast for shipment to the Americas. These historical realities underline the complex and deeply rooted origins of the transatlantic slave trade, a dark chapter in human history that continues to resonate in the present day.